Okay, I'll maybe just do introductions while we're just waiting on the rest of people trickling in. So welcome, first of all, to the Maternal Mental Health Conference. This is your first time with us. We had Alan Gregoire do our keynote at our last one in 2019. So you're very, very welcome. For anyone who doesn't know, Luciana is the newly appointed chair of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance. And yeah, so how long have you been in the post now, Luciana?
Since October. It's gone pretty quickly.
Yeah, and how have you found it? Have you found the new role?
Yes, I mean it's been fantastic. I mean, I was really supported by the Alliance when I served in Parliament. So interesting to now be on the other side and to kind of be actively campaigning and promoting the issues which were so close to my heart then, and even more so now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So just before we go in, and I know you have a talk prepared for us, but just before I begin, I just want to draw our attendees' attention to a few things. So depending on timing, we might have some time for questions afterwards, but if not, we'll endeavour to answer any questions after the conference ends. If you're having any technical difficulties, either drop a message in the chat or you can send an email to hello@theparentrooms.co.uk, and we have someone managing that account as well. For anyone who hasn't been in the conference talks previously, we just want to say that all of the tickets that have been sold today have been all the proceeds of which have gone to the parent rooms to directly support parents in Northern Ireland who are struggling with their mental health. But if you do wish to make a further donation, I'm just going to put a little link in the chat now. Yeah, and so I'd just like to welcome Luciana, and if you want to kick off, that would be great.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. I do have a presentation. I'm going to try and get through it. Really keen to try and answer questions that people may have. We've got 25 minutes, and it's obviously great to be with you all. Just perhaps by quick way of introduction, just in case anyone doesn't have my bio or hasn't seen. So up until 2019, I served for just shy of 10 years in Parliament, in the House of Commons. I was an MP, and during that time, for 7 years, I focused predominantly, the majority of my work was on health. I was the Shadow Minister for Public Health for a number of years. I was the first ever Shadow Cabinet member for mental health. And then in my latter 4 years, I served on the Health and Social Care Select Committee with specific responsibilities for mental health. And it's fair to say throughout that time, I did a lot of work specifically also within the area of perinatal mental health and also infant mental health. I was one of the founding members of the 1001 Days All-Party Parliamentary Group, which was really seeking to champion that idea, which back then a few years ago was kind of pretty much in its infancy, in the political realm. And so I worked kind of very closely with a number of my colleagues to really make the case for ensuring that those first 1001 days, from 0 to 2, became an increasing priority of government, because we know that still today the life chances and life outcomes of 0 to 2-year-olds are determined in that period in terms of what happens for the rest of their lives. So it's a little bit of background. And today, so I left Parliament. In my day job, I work for a communications agency called Edelman. I run their campaigning and advocacy practice. And then in my spare time, I get to do the fantastic job of working now on the other side as the relatively new chair of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance. I also serve as a vice president of the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. I'm an advisory board member of the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, which specifically works on contending with issues to do with mental health and debt and issues with accessing kind of access to finance. And that's a body that's that was backed by Martin Lewis, who was the creator of the Money Saving Expert website, and it was created with the proceeds of that. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour about perhaps why I'm sat before you or stood before you today. I'm actually standing. I like to stand in front of the screen. It's obviously very unusual. I can see there's 43 people on the line, and I'd love to see you all, but obviously this format doesn't allow. So I'm going to do my very best. I hope that one day, and in the not too distant future, I'll be able to come over to Northern Ireland. I have some very fond memories of spending a lot of time, particularly in Belfast, when in a former life I was a student activist, and I was on the national executive of the National Union of Students, which brought me over to Northern Ireland on many, many occasions. So I can't wait to come and see you very soon. But in the meantime, I will speak to you in this virtual format. I know that you've also heard previously from my colleague, Emily, but perhaps people have dipped in and dipped out. So I'm going to touch on a few elements that she touched on in some more detail, and some I'm going to skirt over. Forgive me for kind of repeating, but again, obviously she and I work together, and I'm going to cover some different themes, but touch on some similar ones as well. As I know Emily touched on, the Alliance is a charity that draws together a wide range of organisations that work in or touch the field of perinatal mental health. And our shared vision is to improve the lives of women and families across the UK who are affected by perinatal mental illness. We just very recently welcomed our 100th member. We span lots of different organisations, right from the charities like the NSPCC to the Royal Colleges, to the Institute of Health Visiting, to organisations providing culturally relevant provision, and obviously bodies and organisations that work specifically in all 4 regions of the United Kingdom. And while there's no kind of specific theme for today's event, I kind of asked what people are going to be focusing on in their presentations. I think the Alliance is a mini metaphor for a lot of what other people's presentations have touched on today. And that really is the key about working together. How can we work together across organisations and across professions, particularly in this time as we are making our way through the pandemic and hopefully out the other side to better times, but in what we know are going to be even more testing times. How can we ensure that collaboration to ensure and to secure the best possible services and outcomes for women and their babies? So if I can also say thank you so much, and I should have said this sooner, thank you to the parent rooms for inviting me and for hosting this conference. We always say that these things are timely, but they really are timely. And I say that again, never has there been, I think, a moment where we've heard mental health talked about so much. And I'm going to talk a bit about why specifically at this time perinatal mental health should be why, of course, it's a concern to people on this call already, but why it should be even more pronounced, not just in those people that kind of already care passionately about it, but in kind of the wider society psyche. It's, of course, also entirely fitting that we meet together in Mental Health Awareness Week. There's, I think, Mental Health Awareness Month in the States, and there's again, real focus on so many of these issues, and a specific focus this week also on maternal mental health. And so I kind of touched a bit on my history and my record and the things I did before, but if I just go into just a little bit more detail, just to kind of touch on the journey that I think I certainly saw firsthand, and we're certainly seeing the results of today. As I mentioned, I've been involved in these issues kind of in a very deep way since 2013, and it's almost unrecognisable in terms of how people talk about the issues and address them today. Myself and many others sought to raise awareness about mental health in this country, working with campaigners and charities and health bodies to first and foremost tackle stigma, to secure funding, and ultimately to change the weather when it comes to mental health policy and services. I mentioned already that this was an area that I had a particular interest in. I'd seen firsthand from people close to me who had suffered themselves with perinatal mental health challenges, and I'd also seen what can happen when the support isn't made available. And I think on the positive side, the 10 years I was involved in, from a political perspective, we really did see a transformation in our willingness and our abilities as a society to address these issues. We know that today people, young people in particular, are far more open. We're learning a new language to talk about mental health. And while stigma does still exist, and in some quarters it exists more than others, talking about it is far less taboo than it was. We've seen campaigns such as Time to Talk kind of rise up, and outspoken public figures, including people in the domains of music and in the arts, and even MPs. I think we've got a number of them to thank for this cultural shift. And we're also seeing this now come through specifically in a way that I've never seen before in the area of perinatal mental health as well. We saw the UK government commit to what was dubbed parity of esteem. It's a kind of bit of a whizzy, like a term that not everyone really knows what it's supposed to mean. It's a really important principle, and it's essentially like equality between physical health and mental health. It's a recognition that mental health services should be, of course, as readily available, free at the point of use as physical health services. And while that was enshrined in law, it was back in 2012, which seems like a really, really long time ago. Again, we've certainly still been on a journey to really, I think, achieve that equality, that parity of esteem. So it was important back in 2001 to secure and to integrate that principle into the Health and Social Care Act. But so there's a journey that followed to actually bring that to the fore and make that a reality. So in the same way all of us would expect if we turned up at A&E with a broken bone to see it fixed, that I think, we're still not quite there yet when it comes to, whatever might need attention when it comes to our mental health, for that, again, to receive the same level of attention and resource and support. But we have seen a number of achievements. And as an alliance that's been around, I think Emily will have mentioned it's our 10th anniversary year. And that success and the things that have evolved and the things that have changed couldn't have happened by any individual or any individual organisation by itself. I really believe that to be the case. Of course, individually, organisations have got their own responsibilities, their own focuses when it comes to the services that they're providing. So in terms of time and resource, but collectively, all those organisations coming together, and we've obviously grown as an alliance, so coming together, that's where the difference really has been made. And I've had a number of conversations with former mental health ministers, including Alistair Burt, and more recently Andrea Leadsom, who on behalf of the UK government has kind of led the review into everything to do with those kind of early years. And again, they have very warm reflections of the work that the Alliance has done. And let me be very clear, it's because of the sum of its parts. It's not something that it does in isolation as like a banner, but again, it's drawing on that expertise and using the collective force of all of the different organisations, be they small or large, whether they've got a regional presence or national presence, to make that difference. And again, you will have heard from Emily, my colleague earlier, the Chief Executive of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance. But our focus has been pretty focused. It's been relentless, and the focus has been on how do we turn the map green? How do we turn the map of the UK green to ensure that we see a real progress made around the availability of specialist perinatal mental health services? So we know that significant progress has been made, and we focus on this as kind of the nub of the campaign, because we are very clear that it's the foundation from which so much flows. And we also know from evidence that when there's a specialist on the ground, that really also has a ripple effect to ensure that people are supported in the whole ecology of support that might be available in an area. But that in of itself is really critical to making a difference. I know, again, from my own personal experience, I should have said at the start, I'm also a mum. You don't have to be a mum to be concerned about these issues, but I'm a mum to a just turned 2 and a just turned 4-year-old. And if I reflect on my own experience, perhaps not the difficult experience of having a 1 and 3-year-old in the pandemic, but the experience of having newborn babies, and just the difference between what happened with my first and what happened with my second, in terms of the way in which mental health was raised, both by the maternity service and by my health visitor. There was a real noticeable difference in the number of questions that were being asked and the attention that was given. And I know that's only improved. And also with what we've seen in some places, not in all areas, but with the introduction of also specialist support via midwives as well, for those people that are kind of identified early as needing that additional support. Again, a real marked difference from my experience in Liverpool, where I was living, with that support. But it's not all glowing, and let's not pretend it's all as shiny as we'd like it to be. That we do have some challenges. I don't like to over focus on those challenges, but I don't think we can ignore them. And we've seen this mental health crisis that people have referred to. We've seen a system often still stretched to breaking points. We've seen a patchwork of provision. In some places, we've seen lengthening waiting lists. And often we've seen a very high bar from which people have to meet in order to access that specialist support. And that was before COVID-19 hit us. So the impact of the pandemic really has been a perfect storm of creating more demand at the same time as services that are really under a lot of pressure. And I've spoken to many mental health professionals and people working on the front line, again, across the United Kingdom. And it's no surprise that the pandemic has taken a toll on all professionals that are working in this area. People who themselves have fallen ill, people that have lost colleagues, people that have suffered bereavement of family or friends, and all the while being unable to conduct their normal rounds of visits, if that's what they do in their frontline role, where that's been allowed in person, moving to kind of the virtual world, which has not been optimal for so many women and their babies, and that's extended to talking therapies as well. And the fact is that as the serious threat to our physical public health recedes with the rollout of the vaccination programme, we know that the next big public health challenge is going to be a mental health one, and that's going to be especially for perinatal and infant mental health as well. And there isn't a simple vaccination for mental ill health. It requires a huge range of responses across a range of organisations and institutions. Again, I'm just going to perhaps focus on a little bit more detail on the report that Emily mentioned earlier, that report that we commissioned that looked at mental health in a pandemic, which highlighted, no surprise, the decrease in mental well-being amongst women across the UK during that perinatal period. And if you haven't had a chance to read the report, I would urge you to do so. There's also some summaries if you just want to get some more of the headlines. I'm just going to go through them because, again, I think it's really important findings and recommendations, which is the most important in terms of what can we do to make things better, and for us all collectively to consider in terms of the journey ahead. So we saw a decrease in expectant and new mums' mental well-being, and that was often the result of an increase in anxiety due to the fear of infection of COVID. So we would hope that that will now subside. But we've also seen people experience themselves falling ill, suffering bereavements, combined with a reduction in support. And there's been clear evidence that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on women compared to men, as they are more vulnerable to socio-economic inequalities, to gender inequalities, to domestic abuse, and to economic insecurity. The evidence we collected strongly pointed to women and families experiencing socio-economic deprivation, and women and families of colour being the most affected. We heard this all the time, but it was very, very pronounced within this study. And indeed, people of colour are overrepresented in socio-economically deprived communities, and they've also felt markedly more exposed and less protected than other communities over the crisis, with a greater proportion of women of colour and their family members being employed in those frontline roles. Specifically, our report highlighted a disproportionate impact on, as I've touched on, women from diverse ethnic communities, refugee and asylum seeking women, women and families where language is a barrier, single parent families, women with a relationship that's already under strain, women and families with a history of experiencing domestic abuse or coercive control, pregnant women working in high-risk settings, women and families who lack access to online services. There's a real issue with the digital divide, and women who would have been receiving support from organisations that didn't, because those organisations weren't operating during the lockdown. There were mothers who would have already been anxious in normal times, including expectant mums who have lost one or more previous pregnancies, or those that have been made more anxious by the restrictions and the fear of infection, women and families who've experienced a bereavement, women with poor mental health or a history of mental health problems, and women with a history of severe postnatal mental illness. And in short, the pandemic has not impacted on everyone equally, and it has been worse for those groups that are already facing discrimination and disadvantage. Now, as we think about each of these groups I mentioned just now, I'm very mindful never to forget that within those groups and their, and their titles, they each comprise of real women who have real lives, who have real babies and real families, and more often than not are seeing an intersection between those different groups. They're not experiencing one of those issues in isolation. And that places even greater emphasis on tailored, personalised support for each person, for each woman and their baby and their family, as well as the overarching need for a joined-up approach across services. Our report also highlighted the disparities between regions and nations within the UK, raising the spectre about the quality of care depending still on your postcode. And thanks to the campaigning and awareness raising I mentioned, and this is testament to all those people that, in spite of the additional pressures placed on them, step up to the plate. We have now seen the government recognise the risks to mental health posed specifically now during the mental health period. And we've seen government investments specifically across the 4 nations dedicated towards perinatal mental health care. It might not be as much as we would want in all those areas, but certainly we are now seeing some steps in the right direction. It hasn't been a consistent level of support, but it's certainly, it's like I said, it's a commitment, that's an investment. But it's a commitment and investment that's also against a backdrop of a cut to investment in other services. So we've seen cuts to maternity services and health visiting, kind of sometimes dressed up as other things, but we know that it's happening, and that has obviously those services interact directly with women in the perinatal period and will have some impact. There's also strong evidence, people will know on this call, of cuts to statutory services, which has had an impact. And I know the next session you're going to specifically also be talking about the impact of the voluntary and community sector, and that is so vital. Again, I know from my own experiences as a mum of younger children that the informal support from others in that same boat is invaluable, and support from family and friends is vital too. And yet these informal bonds of kinship and friendship have been broken during this past year, including increasing many women's isolation and taking a toll on our mental well-being. What was really striking, I've heard this and I've seen this said quite a few times, lockdown has for many felt like being locked up, and experiencing that when you are with a new baby, perhaps your first child in particular, the strain of that experience, if you don't have any sort of support around you, can be so challenging. So if I was trying to sum all this evidence up, we are making some progress. It is patchy, and clearly the pandemic has exacerbated some of the deep inequalities that we know and were already there. So these are the challenges. What now are the answers? And what we can do, what are we doing going forward, and what is the priority, and how can we all together make that difference? So the report itself has a number of different recommendations. I'm just going to focus on a few of them. Of course, we need the funding to future-proof our perinatal mental health services against any future pandemics or any kind of future experiences that we've had like this past year. We now know that the fact is this probably will happen again. I mean, I wish that wasn't the case, but if it does, we must be ready. And we've certainly, I think, now learnt the value of robust public institutions and public services, and in some ways that's helped to really focus minds politically to understand the value that these services have brought. And we only have to consider the success of the vaccination programme. Never again must we face a crisis with our public bodies starved of resources. But in order to kind of make that case, we need better data, and we need better data from each part of the UK, and that really has to include those hard to reach groups. We need a better understanding of the impact of remote working on perinatal mental health services. We are still learning about the impact of that, and we mustn't make assumptions. For some, we know that certainly services like face-to-face consultations have been hampered, but we also hear and learn that for some women, they prefer that online engagement. For some women with anxiety, with agoraphobia or childcare responsibilities. So we might end up with a blend of the old and the new as we emerge over the coming months. And our report makes the case, a very strong case, for the voluntary and community organisations as part of the mix, as part of that kind of robust ecology, providing local services enmeshed in the needs of local communities that are responsive, that are specialist, and are trusted. And we make a plea for the mental health and well-being of one other vital group, and that's the people on the front line. It's the health visitors, it's the volunteers, it's the mental health professionals, it's the NHS staff, it's people working in the voluntary and community sector. We know that the pandemic has created post-traumatic stress disorders, anxieties, and depression, and other mental health conditions in the very people that we rely on to help others with their mental health. And that really has to be a focus as we go forward. And lastly, we've got to tackle the deep-seated inequalities in our service provision. That includes women of colour, women with disabilities, and other women who face discrimination and disadvantage. The principle of the NHS has always been that care should be provided free at the point of need, regardless of ability to pay. And all barriers to that founding principle of equal access based on clinical need must be removed. And as an alliance, we've got an exciting campaign ahead. We want to do it all, but again, we're going to do what we've done up until now, where we've seen success, and we are going to focus. We've now included health visiting and maternity services as a priority, as well as ensuring that the voluntary and community sector receives the funding it needs. That doesn't mean that we're going to ignore all other elements of the system. We're going to amplify what our member organisations are doing in those additional areas. I want to finish on a note of optimism. We've seen the awesome power of public institutions to tackle great challenges over the last year. And we've seen how governments can marshal resources very, very quickly when there's a clear objective. If I can just share a political example, we've just seen recently in the States the importance of political will. They've come forward with a $4.1 trillion economic rescue plan, where last year there was absolutely nothing. And my point is that the crisis in perinatal mental health can be tackled and fixed if we have the political will and if we have the coordination of resources, and in particular where we can work together. And certainly that's what I hope and think today is all about. For the Alliance, we know that our success in the UK has not only inspired similar other alliances across the world, but we've seen the creation now of a global alliance that's working to achieve these goals. We've also been successful in securing additional resources and funds in tough times, including an additional £4.5 million in Northern Ireland. But our work continues. And here in I say here, I'm not in Northern Ireland, but in Northern Ireland, as Emily indicated, we need to turn the map green to ensure specialist services are available for all. And we would like to see a mother and baby unit opened, and we'll be looking at what else is needed in addition to make that difference. So I look forward to breaking down the barriers, working together to forging new alliances and collaborations, and taking perinatal mental health to new heights. And I really look forward to working with you all in that endeavour.
Thank you so much, Luciana. That was absolutely fantastic. The difference that the Maternal Mental Health Alliance has made across the UK in the last 10 years has been absolutely incredible. But there's one thing that you stood out. Obviously, most of our attendees will be coming from Northern Ireland, and there's one thing that stood out that you said, and it was about not having this postcode lottery. And it's something I think ourselves in Northern Ireland have appreciated, because oftentimes we see the investment and we see the opportunities and we see the campaigns happening in the other nations in the UK, and quite often we're left behind as a little, side note. So it's been great to have Northern Ireland included in that. And the new phase of the campaign that's coming, seeing the maternity services and the health visiting and the community and voluntary sectors specifically highlighted, I think is going to be really important for us, because until we get that mother and baby unit, those are the services that are holding parents up. So it's really, really exciting to see that happen. We just have one comment here from one of our attendees just before we close off, and it just says, "Thank you so much for acknowledging the impact of COVID on mental health professionals. Redeployment took many of us from our normal roles, and not being able to provide much needed services to those in increased need due to COVID was indeed very stressful." So thank you very much for that. And yeah, so that's us for now. We're about to move on to our community panel, where we'll be hearing from the community and voluntary sector and the challenges they're facing. But thank you so much, Luciana, for joining us today, and take care.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Look forward to working with you all. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.